All right, let's jump right in. We're always taught that in war, the whole point is total victory, right? You take everything you possibly can. But what if the most powerful move, the smartest thing you can do is to win and then just walk away? It sounds crazy, but today we're going to get into the brilliant and kind of strange logic behind a strategic retreat. I mean, it's a real head-scratcher, isn't it? Just picture it. You're at the absolute peak of your power. Your enemies are crushed. There's territory, riches, everything you could possibly want, right there for the taking. So why on earth would you just stop and turn around? It seems to go against every single instinct of a conqueror. But history, you'll find, is packed with these kinds of moments, and they teach us something really powerful. So, to figure this out, we're going to look at two incredible historical riddles separated by more than 700 years. First up, a modern one. China's absolutely baffling retreat after they beat India back in 1962. And then we're jumping way back to an ancient mystery. Why did Genghis Khan, maybe the greatest conqueror of all time, turn his back on the unbelievable wealth of India? And trust me, the answers are probably not what you're thinking. Okay, let's start with 1962. So China pulls off this swift, decisive victory against India. And then they do something nobody expected. They just stopped and pulled back. To really get this, you have to shift your thinking. This wasn't a retreat in the way we usually think of it. It was, believe it or not, the final step of a calculated mission. So what was that mission exactly? Well, China, under Mao Zedong, wasn't trying to conquer India, not at all. This was a political war, and they had very specific, very limited goals. They wanted to humiliate Prime Minister Nehru, who was a big rival on the world stage. They wanted to teach India a lesson, so to speak. And, crucially, they wanted to lock down their occupation of Tibet and solidify their control over this really strategic region called Aksai Chin. See, grabbing huge chunks of India was never, ever part of the plan. And this next part really gets to the heart of their logic. Once those objectives were ticked off the list, holding on to extra land, like the state of Assam, wasn't a prize. It was a huge liability. It meant a long, expensive occupation. It meant stretching their supply lines thin across the Himalayas. And it meant dealing with a local population that did not want them there. In other words, as the quote says, it becomes a kind of an additional burden. They'd already won. Anything more would have been a massive strategic blunder. So here's the bottom line, the thing you have to remember. The withdrawal wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the final move in a successful game. By pulling back to the lines they'd already decided on, China was showing absolute control. It was a total power move. They were sending a message. We can hit you whenever we want, and we can leave whenever we want. And you know what? That's a way scarier message than getting bogged down in some messy long-term occupation. Mission accomplished. Time to go home. Okay, now, let's rewind the clock. Way back. We're going back centuries to a puzzle that's maybe even bigger. It's 1221, and the world's most feared conqueror, Genghis Khan, is standing on the banks of the Indus River. His enemy is on the run, the path into India is wide open, and he has the most terrifying army on the planet with him. So, why did he turn around? And just to give you a sense of what he was walking away from, you have to understand this. Back then, India accounted for roughly 1/3 of the entire world's economy. A third. It was the ultimate jackpot. For pretty much any other conqueror in history, turning that down would have been unthinkable. So, over the years, people have come up with some, well, let's say, creative theories for why he left. My favorite is the one about a talking unicorn that supposedly warned him to turn back. Seriously. Or maybe, the hot Indian climate was just too much for his tough Mongol warriors. But these just don't really hold water. Other armies from cold places did just fine in India. No. The real reason is much smarter, much more strategic, and it all comes down to the Khan's personal code. So if we want to solve this mystery, we've got to stop looking at the weather or, magical animals. We have to look at the man himself. Genghis Khan operated by this surprisingly consistent, almost hidden code. His actions weren't random acts of violence. They followed a very, very specific pattern. And here is that pattern, laid out plain as day. You look at his biggest campaigns, the ones he led himself, and you see they weren't just about grabbing land. They were almost always wars of retaliation. He went after China to get revenge for them murdering one of his relatives and for messing with his people for centuries. He invaded the Karakatai right after they killed his grandson-in-law. And that huge, devastating war against the Khwarezmian Empire, That only happened because they made the fatal mistake of killing his trade delegation and his ambassadors. See the pattern? It was always a response. He had to be provoked.
We can actually give this a name. Let's call it his retaliatory principle. The core motivation for him, personally, to go to war wasn't just greed or a thirst for conquest. It was about justice, or at least his version of it. It was about revenge. He only went to war when he felt his red lines had been crossed, when his people or his honor had been directly attacked. This changes how you see him, right? He's not just some simple conqueror. He's a leader with a very clear, if very brutal, set of rules.
And that brings us to the simple, almost elegant answer to our whole puzzle. When it came to India, there was no provocation. None. The ruler there, Sultan Iltutmish, was a very smart guy. He saw the Mongol storm clouds gathering on the horizon, and he very wisely refused to give shelter to Genghis Khan's enemy who was fleeing. He offered no insult, no challenge. He gave the Khan absolutely no reason to attack. No casus belli, they say. So, at the end of the day, his decision was really simple and perfectly strategic. He had no reason to attack India. His main target, the guy he was chasing, was already defeated and no longer a threat, so his mission in that direction was done. Plus, he had a much bigger problem to deal with, a betrayal by one of his vassals, way back in China. That became his top priority, because his motivation was always about his code of justice, not just about getting rich. The legendary wealth of India, it was completely irrelevant to him in that moment. So now we have these two leaders, right? From totally different times, totally different worlds. And yet, they both make the same choice that looks, from the outside, completely irrational. So what's the timeless strategic lesson that ties them together? Just look at them side by side. The underlying logic is exactly the same. Both China in 1962 and Genghis Khan in 1221 were operating based on clear, defined objectives. They weren't just driven by blind ambition. China's goal was limited and political. Once they got it, they stopped. Genghis Khan's goal was retaliation. When there was no one to retaliate against, there was no mission. Both of them, in their own way, understood the incredible danger of pushing too far, of overextending themselves. And this quote, which reflects on Genghis Khan's really harsh upbringing, it's the key to his entire philosophy. He realized that power can make you wealthy, but wealth cannot buy you power. He learned that lesson the hard way, early in life. Power is the real currency. Wealth is just a bonus. All the riches in India couldn't buy him the power he needed to deal with a betrayal that threatened his empire back home. Chasing wealth instead of securing his power would have been a rookie mistake. So what can we take away from all this? Well, it boils down to this really powerful four-step idea, the art of strategic limitation. Step 1, define your goal. Know exactly what you want. Step 2, achieve that goal. But here's where the real genius comes in. Step 3, avoid overextension. And step 4, the hardest part, have the discipline to know when to stop. Because what we learn from both of these victors is that true power isn't really measured by how much land you can grab or how much treasure you can loot. It's about having absolute clarity of purpose. It's about having the wisdom to know when your mission is actually complete. It's about understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is declare victory and go home. And you know, this idea, it doesn't just apply to ancient conquerors or modern armies. It applies to business, to our careers, even to our own lives. So I'll leave you with this question. In your world, when is walking away the most powerful move you can possibly make?